Hi guys, and here we are for video number 4 on mathematical models. So we just finished building this mathematical matrix model with all the different symbols in here and filled in all the zeros. Now we have to figure out where do we actually get the numbers for each of these different parameters, the g's, the f's, the p's. So this is the next step, assigning values to these different parameters. And this involves actually doing field work if you're lucky, or maybe taking data from the literature. But at any rate, I want you to know what fieldwork someone did, maybe not the actual modeler, to get the numbers that are in these parameters. So for albatrosses, we can get information on survival, fecundity, growth by looking at banded albatrosses and tracking them through time because they come back to pretty close to the same location where they were born, usually within several meters of where they were born to lay their egg and then to lay future eggs. It's kind of interesting to see how we do this with different organisms. For corals, since they don't move, you can tag a particular location and go back to that same place over time and see what happens. For polar bears, they actually do a tattoo on the inside of the lip. Kind of interesting there. For whales, you can tell individual orcas apart by taking a picture of that saddle patch there in the dorsal fin. And so you can just take a photo of the whale and figure out, which individual it is that you're looking at and track it through time. For some individuals, for some species, you really can't tell individuals apart. It's just not easy. So sometimes what they have to do is just go out and catch a whole bunch of individuals and then measure them, tell if they're reproductive, and kind of back calculate a lot of the parameters, but this is definitely not optimal. Okay, so here we have the conceptual model or life cycle diagram for the albatrosses, and we'll add in the numbers that we got from going out and tracking individual albatrosses over many years. I think it's about 30 years now that they've been tracking them. So here's the actual numbers. You can see that in this case survival, because growing into the next stage is automatic. In this case G is actually survival. Survival increases as albatrosses get older. And again, only stage 8 and up reproduces. And once you get older than 8, your survival goes down a little bit. In this case, these are all survival because it's based on age. So there's no possibility of staying in the same stage. So it's, if you survive, you go to the next stage. Except here, where you stay in the same stage. Okay, so here we have the transition matrix of all the symbols, and now we'll put in those numbers. Ta-da! And now you could put this matrix into Excel and start doing the analysis we'll be talking about in just a second. Okay, so let's go back to the actual Laysan albatrosses and start working through the model. So again, here's all the steps, and we're finally at the point where we can use the model to answer our research questions. And so in class, we're going to be using this add-on to Microsoft Excel called Pop Tools to actually answer all these different research questions. Unfortunately, it only works on Windows computers, and you go to this website here and download a file and install it, and then you'll have this special add-ins menu and Pop Tools, and you can very easily calculate the population growth rate, stage distribution, reproductive value distribution, elasticity, and project the matrix in throughout time, which is all of the things we're going to be doing in the next few slides here. So, in order to use the model to answer our questions, first we have to remember what were our questions. So one of the questions we usually ask with population models is just, is the population growing? And then, which vital rates, growth, survival, reproduction, should managers focus their monitoring and conservation efforts on? Which stages should managers focus their monitoring and conservation efforts on? Which stages contain most of the population? And how might management actions impact the population? So in order to determine whether the population is growing, you really need to multiply this transition matrix by the population vector at time t to get the population vector at time t plus 1. And you can do this pretty easily with matrix multiplication in pop tools under matrix projection. So for each of these different I don't know what to call them. We'll call them tools to answer these questions up here. It'll say mathematically what it is, but we're not going to talk too much about exactly what the math means. But you could look up these terms and you could figure out how to calculate these each without using a computer if you really wanted to. And then it's going to say for pop tools how you calculate each of these, which makes it really easy. So once you've projected the population through time, you can add up all the individuals in the population and get population size over time and do a graph like this. So you'll see here, with the population increasing, obviously the population is growing. Here the population is decreasing, so obviously the population is not growing. We also have a shortcut way of doing that, which is calculating the population growth rate, which you might have called in previous classes the instantaneous rate of increase or other terms. But in this case, we'll just call it the population growth rate, lambda. And lambda is pretty simple. It's just the population size in time t plus 1 divided by the population size in time t. If lambda is greater than 1, then that means the population size in time t, if lambda is equal to 1, then the population size in time t plus 1 is equal to the population size in time t. So therefore, the population size is constant. It's not growing or declining. If lambda is greater than 1, then the population size in time t plus 1 is greater than at time t, so the population size is increasing. If lambda is less than 1, then the population size is decreasing. And the way you calculate this mathematically is calculating the dominant eigenvalue of the transition matrix. So it actually completely depends on the transition matrix. It doesn't depend on the initial population vector at all. And in pop tools, there's a really easy, you can do it through the menu to calculate the instantaneous rate of growth. Or you can just type in this formula here for the dominant eigenvalue of the transition matrix. So here, for the lionfish that we talked about earlier, the number of lionfish was growing so greatly that it actually looks like exponential growth. So what would its lambda be? Its population growth rate greater than 1, equal to 1, or less than 1? Since the population growth rate is increasing, lambda is going to be greater than 1. In fact, in this case, it's 1.134, increasing rapidly. For the albatrosses, our population actually looks like this. The population is actually declining a little bit. The lambda is 0.995, so it's just barely declining. And this is before you incorporate in the lead poisoning. Now, this projection through time actually does depend on what your initial population vector is in. We're going to be talking in just a second about what a stable stage distribution is. But essentially, what happens in these first couple years depends on how many individuals there are in each stage that you put in at the very beginning at time 0. So you could have a straight line showing the same trend throughout all your time that you're looking at, or it might do something funny in the first couple of years. And that's because you have an initial population vector that doesn't match the stable stage distribution. So when we're asking, is this population growing, or what is the population doing, we're really asking about over the long term. Don't worry so much about what happens in those first couple of years. So we really want to know what happens after many years of these vital rates. Okay, the next thing is, which vital rate should managers focus monitoring and conservation effort on? And we measure this using elasticity. Elasticity is the effect that a change in each one of the vital rates has on the population growth rate. We use it to determine which vital rate changes the population growth rate most. And it's essentially the partial derivative of the population growth rate with respect to the vital rate. But fortunately, you can do it really easy in pop tools. And you end up getting a table something like this. And so each of these numbers corresponds to one of those matrix elements on the transition matrix. So where is elasticity highest on this table here? So look for the largest number. That's right, it's down here. And that corresponds to persistence of adults. So that means that managers should focus their monitoring and conservation efforts on persistence of adults, because that is going to help the population grow fastest. It's going to have the biggest impact on the population growth rate. If you put all of those numbers that correspond to the vital rates into a table like this and then graph it, again, you can see that the highest elasticity by far is for PA, much more than for fecundity or growth. So it's really, really most important to focus on PA if you possibly can. Again, if you graph it, it looks like that. Now, which stage should managers focus their monitoring and conservation efforts on? Can you take a guess based on the last one? So we measure this by recording reproductive value. Reproductive value is the expected number of offspring that remain to be born to each individual of a stage. So for example, the reproductive value of an individual of age 10 is all of the offspring that they could lay at age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on, if they actually live that long. So it's the number of offspring produced by individuals of age X or older, and it's discounted by the likelihood of surviving to reproduce. So if they're not likely to survive to reproduce to have more offspring, their reproductive value will be lower, divided by the number of individuals of age X. It's essentially which stages are most valuable for future population growth, and therefore where managers should focus on monitoring and conservation effort. Again, you can calculate this, pretty easy, except actually it's, let me type it here, reproductive value. And you'll get a vector with all of the stages on the left. So look at that vector. Which stage has the highest reproductive value? Well, you'll notice that the last couple, they're all relatively close. So let's just call it and say those last four have the highest reproductive value. And again, if you chart it, you see those last four have the highest reproductive value. So managers should focus monitoring and conservation effort on older albatrosses, the ones that are adult and reproducing, and to a lesser extent, the older subadult and immature stages as well. Affecting the eggs is not going to have as big of an impact. Affecting the eggs of the chicks is not going to have as big an impact on the population. So what would this reproductive value chart look like for humans? Well, if you think about it, let's start with women. Women, the reproductive value increases, and let's think about in a third world country where women are not likely to survive to maturity. It increases with age because they're more likely to survive to have children. It reaches its peak at about maybe 25 or so. And then your fertility actually decreases with time. So it's going to decrease a little bit here. So something like that, where your highest reproductive value is probably about the 20s. And what about for men? Remember, men can have fertility much later in life. So again, it starts slow as a child, and then it increases, and it stays relatively high throughout life, until finally not having any more reproductive value. So if you want to maximize a sustainable harvest of a population, you need to harvest stages that contribute less to population growth rate. So therefore, you want to harvest stages that have low reproductive value if you possibly can. If they're not reproducing anymore, go for it, harvest them. To maximize the impact of restoring a population, you really want to transplant individuals that have that are likely to survive and reproduce a lot. So you want to transplant individuals with high reproductive value. Natural selection will act most strongly on stages that contribute